I thought closing the biggest deal of my career would be the highlight of my week, until I walked into my in-laws' house and found my wife in bed, with 3 strangers. What happened next shattered everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and family. Hey everyone, welcome back, and thanks for being here today. I've got a fresh story to share, one that still sticks with me, so let's get right into it. I turned slightly toward the man seated next to me in the second row of first class and offered a small smile in response. The man, sitting comfortably with the quiet authority he always carried, wasn't just my boss. He'd also been my father-in-law for the past 7 years. When it was just the two of us in a relaxed setting, I called him Brian. But in professional environments, I always addressed him as Mr. Brown. It was an unspoken agreement between us, one of those silent understandings that helped keep the lines between work and family life from getting too blurry. I married his only daughter a couple of years after I started working at his company, Brown Electrical Solutions. I was fresh out of college back then, just a young mechanical engineer with more ambition than experience, and not much more than a diploma in hand. The job market was brutal at the time. Most companies were hiring seasoned engineers with decades of field experience, and guys like me barely got callbacks, let alone interviews. He could have brought in someone with a long list of credentials, but for some reason he took a chance on me. And I never forgot that. From day one, I threw myself into the work, determined to show that his faith in me wasn't misplaced. I gave it everything I had, long nights, weekends, and an almost obsessive attention to detail, because I knew what that opportunity meant. Honestly, I said, continuing the conversation as our flight cruised smoothly above the clouds, I really thought Parker Industries was going to lock this one down. Every time I talked with Tom or Morgan from their purchasing team, it seemed like they were leaning hard toward sticking with their current vendor. The way they talked, it was like they already had the deal sewn up. It wasn't hard to see why. Parker had an established, decade-long relationship with that supplier. It felt like we were the outsiders trying to wedge our way into something pretty tightly sealed. Brian glanced over, his expression calm but sincere. "You know, Alex," he said, "I truly believe you were the difference maker in all of this. Parker's design team hit us with 3 unexpected curveballs. Those sudden spec changes could have derailed the whole process. But every single time, you came back with not just one, but multiple revised designs that nailed exactly what they were looking for." He paused, giving me a look that mixed pride with approval. "They were clearly impressed, not just by your technical ability, but by how fast and confidently you responded. You handled those challenges like a seasoned pro, son. Honestly, I think you've more than earned a solid bonus for the way you represented Brown Electrical down in Atlanta. I'll make sure that's handled as soon as we're back." I nodded, doing my best to keep the pride from showing too much in my voice. "Thank you, sir," I said, genuinely grateful but keeping my tone grounded. "I was just doing what I could for the team," I said, shrugging lightly. "I'm just glad it actually made a difference." "It made all the difference," Brian replied without missing a beat. "Now, the real challenge is making sure we follow through on every single thing we promised them." "We will," I told him confidently, and I meant it. The folks back at the office, they're rock solid. Every one of them takes real pride in what they do. They don't cut corners, and they definitely don't take shortcuts when it comes to delivering on our word. That, in my eyes, was one of the biggest strengths of working for a mid-size firm like ours. We weren't so big that we lost sight of what mattered, but we weren't too small to handle serious business either. We cared deeply, every project was personal, and our name meant something in the industry. Brian let out a short chuckle, nodding as he leaned back in his seat. He seemed content, and for a few minutes neither of us said anything. We just let the gentle hum of the engines and the occasional clink of drink glasses in the cabin fill the quiet. It was one of those peaceful silences that didn't need to be filled. Then the pilot's voice crackled through the intercom, announcing we were on final approach to our home airport. Both of us shifted in our seats, fastened our seatbelts again, and glanced out the window as the city came into view beneath us. "When we grab our bags and load up your car," Brian said casually, "I might need your help hauling those boxes of prototype gear into the house before you head off to see your lovely bride." He shot me a grin, one of those sly, knowing smiles he reserved for moments like this, half teasing, half sincere. He knew exactly how eager I was to get back to Linda. It had only been 5 days, but it felt longer. In the 7 years we'd been married, plus the year before that when we were exclusive, I had never gone more than 3 days without being near her, without feeling her presence beside me, hearing her laugh, or sharing those quiet evening moments we both cherished. Now, after nearly a week away, I was itching to get home. I missed her warmth, her scent, even the way she fussed about little things around the house. And I was certain she was counting down the hours too, waiting just as anxiously for me to walk through that front door. As the plane began its slow, graceful descent toward the runway, I let my mind drift from business meetings and boardrooms to Linda's smile. We'd first met back in college. She was just 19 then, bright-eyed, sharp-tongued, and absolutely unforgettable. After a year of taking things slow, just dating casually, things between us began to deepen in a way I hadn't expected. We had officially decided to commit to each other exclusively not long after we started dating seriously. By the time she turned 21, we were already married. Even now, years down the road, I still found myself captivated by how beautiful she was. Time had only enhanced her looks. Her natural curves had become even more defined, and the softness of her features carried a maturity that made her all the more irresistible to me. Her bright smile, that playful laugh of hers, it still lit a fire inside me, the kind that had never really gone out. Just thinking about Linda brought a familiar surge of warmth and excitement through my chest. I couldn't wait to be back in her arms, to hold her close again after being away for what felt like too long. I turned slightly and caught a glimpse of Brian beside me. He wore a faint smile, almost wistful, and I got the sense that he, too, had been swept up in thoughts of his own wife, Brenda. It was hard not to notice how much Linda took after her mother. Brenda, now 48, was in many ways a more refined, mature version of Linda. They both had that striking strawberry blonde hair, those long athletic legs honed from their weekly tennis matches, and a calm, graceful confidence in the way they moved through the world. If Linda eventually aged into someone like Brenda, then I knew without a doubt I was one of the luckiest men alive. As the pilot came back over the speaker to announce our final descent, I tightened my seatbelt and tried to temper my growing anticipation. My mind was already back at home, imagining Linda waiting for me, probably peeking out the window every few minutes to see if I'd pulled into the driveway yet. The plane touched down smoothly, and within a few minutes we were taxiing to the gate. Sitting up front, we were among the first to deboard. But any time we saved getting off the plane was quickly lost when we reached the baggage claim. Nearly 40 minutes passed before the conveyor belt even started moving. Once our luggage and the 2 large boxes of prototype components finally came through, Brian and I both looked more than ready to call it a day. Thankfully, traffic was light. Being a Saturday afternoon, the roads were pretty clear, and the drive home was quick and easy. Since Brian and Brenda lived only a couple of miles from us, dropping him off first didn't feel like much of a detour. But as we pulled into their circular driveway, something caught my eye that didn't sit right. 3 cars were parked out front. One was Linda's familiar white BMW, but the other 2 were complete mysteries. I didn't recognize them at all. I nodded toward the unfamiliar vehicles. "You know who those belong to?" I asked, a little unease creeping into my voice. Brian shook his head slowly. "No idea," he said, his tone suddenly serious, heavy even. I looked over at him, and what I saw on his face made my stomach tighten. His expression had darkened, brows drawn together, lips set in a tight line. Something about the scene didn't feel right to either of us. "I've got a bad feeling about this," I murmured, my voice barely above a whisper. "Let's stay quiet and just follow my lead." We stepped out of the car carefully, leaving the doors slightly ajar to keep from making any noise. Brian took the lead, moving toward the front door. He tried the handle first, locked. Then he pulled out his key and slid it into the lock set, quietly turning it. The handset gave way, but the deadbolt stayed firm. He tested it again, then slowly turned the knob back, shaking his head with a grim look. Inside, the house was unusually still. The living room was empty, and the den showed no sign of anyone, except for the clothes. Random articles were scattered around the furniture, too haphazard to be anything but careless. Something wasn't right. That's when we heard it. Faint noises, muffled voices, rhythmic sounds, coming from the direction of the hallway. Brian motioned for me to follow, and we crept quietly, each step measured and cautious. We stopped just before the master bedroom door. It was wide open. What we saw inside knocked the breath from my lungs. There, tangled together on the bed, were 2 women and 2 men, all of them completely naked. Caught in a moment we weren't supposed to witness. My eyes locked on the women, and in a flash I recognized them both: Brenda, my mother-in-law, and Linda, my wife. Any lingering hope that maybe this was a misunderstanding vanished the moment I heard their voices. The way they were speaking, encouraging, laughing, it was all voluntary. No force. No confusion. They were there by choice. And they had both made that choice fully aware of what it meant. It was betrayal. Complete and deliberate. I felt a light pressure on my arm. I turned and saw Brian looking at me, his face drained of color but composed. He didn't speak. He just gave me a steady look, then motioned silently back toward the hallway. We moved in silence, retreating to the den. There he opened a small closet and pulled it open. "Son," he said, voice low and calm but filled with something cold beneath the surface. "I think I know you well enough to say, you're not the kind of man who's going to just let this go, are you?" "No, sir," I replied, my voice rough with emotion. "That just destroyed everything. Our marriage, it's gone." He gave a slow nod. "Same here. I've had my doubts about Brenda for a while, but I never had anything concrete. Until now." Then he turned and reached into the closet again. This time he pulled out 2 aluminum softball bats and handed one to me. After that, he grabbed a small digital camera from the shelf nearby. "Here's what we're going to do," he said, his tone steady like he'd already played this scenario out in his head. "We're going back in there. You go to the far side of the room, I'll take the near. Let me snap a few pictures first. Then we're going to make it very clear this is the last time they'll ever humiliate us like this." His grip tightened on the handle of the bat. "Just aim right between their legs." I didn't need to ask what Brian meant. His intentions were crystal clear. There was no confusion about our target. Their groins were about to pay the price. As we approached the bedroom again, the doorway still wide open, Brenda's voice floated into the hallway, high-pitched and breathless. "Oh God, baby, I just love it," she moaned. Then came Linda's voice, slightly muffled but unmistakable. Yeah. I would have missed out if you hadn't." Her sentence trailed off into giggles and moans. That's when the quiet click of Brian's camera shutter snapped through the room like a gunshot. Linda's head was pressed into the mattress at that moment, but the sound froze her in place. In an instant, she started scrambling to lift herself up and look around. Confusion turned to panic. Before anyone could say a word or move further, Brian calmly set the camera down on the dresser and together, like clockwork, we stepped forward and swung the bats. The sharp cracks of aluminum striking flesh echoed through the room. Instantly, the sounds of pleasure were replaced by the gut-wrenching screams of 2 men in agony. Both of them tumbled off the bed, writhing and gasping, clutching themselves as they crumpled to the floor in pure pain, curling into tight balls like injured animals. Brenda and Linda screamed, scrambling backward toward the headboard, trying desperately to grab at sheets and pillows to shield themselves. Brenda was shaking, eyes wide with fear, her voice trembling. "Oh my God, please don't hurt me," she whimpered. I could hear Linda saying something, maybe pleading, maybe trying to explain, but I couldn't make sense of the words. There was too much noise in my head. A red haze had taken over, clouding my vision, thick with fury and heartbreak. I locked eyes with the man who had been with Brenda, older, sweaty, wide-eyed with fear, and rage surged through me. I raised the bat again, my knuckles white from the grip, the muscles in my arms tensed for another swing. "Alex." Brian's voice sliced through my fury, sharp and commanding. I froze mid-swing, the bat hovering in the air. "Enough," he said, locking eyes with me. He gave a short, firm nod, his meaning clear. My chest rose and fell with ragged breaths, the adrenaline pumping through every vein. My hand was clenched so tight around the bat it hurt. But slowly, forcefully, I loosened my grip and lowered it to my side, the weight of the moment heavier than the bat itself. Brian, calm but with an unmistakable edge in his movements, bent down and grabbed a couple of pairs of jeans from the floor. With focused precision, he rummaged through the pockets. Seconds later, he held up 2 sets of car keys. He didn't say a word. With deliberate steps, Brian walked over to the window facing the street. He unlatched it, pushed the storm screen aside, and with the kind of practiced ease that made me think he'd been holding back a storm for years, he hurled both sets of keys out into the yard without hesitation. The silence that followed was deafening. Brian didn't even glance out to see where the keys had landed. Judging by the lack of a metallic clatter, it was safe to assume they'd disappeared somewhere deep in the yard, probably swallowed up by the thick summer grass on the far side of the house. Then, without a word, he turned back toward the chaos behind us. His face was carved in stone, focused, cold, and absolutely done with the situation. The 2 men were still on the floor, curled up and moaning, one of them clutching himself like he'd been hit by a freight train. Brian didn't hesitate. He reached down and grabbed the scrawnier of the 2, the younger guy who'd been with Brenda, by the arm and shoulder. The guy yelped like a kicked dog, still trying to hold his groin with his other hand, but Brian didn't blink. "You thought it was okay to come into my home, into my bedroom and lay hands on my wife?" Brian growled, his voice low but furious. "Well, this is what you get." The guy tried weakly to resist, squirming like he might break free, but Brian's grip was vice-tight. There was no getting out of it. He dragged the man toward the window like a sack of garbage, ignoring the pleading gasps that spilled from the guy's mouth. When they reached it, Brian didn't stop. He gave one final pull, then launched him out without a second thought. The man screamed as he flipped headfirst out the open frame. A second later, we heard the unmistakable crunch of branches and a choked cry of pain. From the sound of it, he'd landed squarely in the rose bushes. Definitely not a soft landing. I didn't need any instructions. The rage inside me hadn't cooled a single degree. My eyes went straight to the other guy, the one who'd been with Linda. He was bigger than the first, a lot broader in the shoulders, probably thought he could handle himself. But he hadn't counted on the kind of strength that comes from heartbreak and fury rolled into one. I reached down and grabbed him by the back of his neck and his waistband, lifting with a force that felt almost supernatural. He thrashed, his legs kicking against the carpet, trying to buck out of my grip. Wait, man. I didn't," he sputtered, his voice cracking with panic. But none of it mattered. It was just noise. Background static behind the roaring in my ears. "You thought you could just walk into my life, into my home, into my marriage, and walk away from it like nothing happened?" I spat, dragging him toward the window. "Not today." He gasped again, still trying to talk, still trying to squirm free. But I wasn't letting go. When I reached the window, I didn't hesitate. I pushed him forward, and with everything I had, I hurled him out into the open air. His scream ripped through the quiet suburban neighborhood, louder than the first guy's, more desperate. And then there was a dull thud, followed by silence. The second man landed hard, right in the same patch of thorny rose bushes. He started thrashing, yelling out a mix of curses and pain as the sharp branches tore into his bare skin. I didn't feel an ounce of sympathy. Brian stepped up to the window, slammed it shut with a heavy thunk, and twisted the lock. The click sounded final, like a gavel coming down. Then he turned, eyes burning, toward the two women still huddled in stunned silence on the bed. Brenda was visibly shaking, tears running freely down her cheeks. Her arms were wrapped around her chest like she could somehow hide from what she'd done. Linda, on the other hand, just stared at me. Her face was pale and unreadable, eyes wide with a mix of fear, disbelief, and something else I couldn't quite identify. Regret? Guilt? Maybe even shame. I didn't know, and at that moment I didn't care. My heart was hammering against my ribs, my lungs were fighting for breath, and my whole body still trembled with adrenaline. But the room had gone dead quiet, except for the faint groans and muffled curses drifting in from outside. Then Brian spoke, his voice colder than I'd ever heard it. "Now," he said, his tone icy and measured, "we're going to have a little talk." That's when the room exploded into chaos. Both Brenda and Linda started talking over each other, desperate to be heard. "It's not what it looked like." Brenda sobbed, her voice cracking. "Brian, please, I love you. I've always loved you. You're the only man who's ever mattered to me. Please, you have to believe me." Linda's voice followed right behind her mother's, shaky and pleading. "Alex, please listen to me. This wasn't what you think, I swear. I love you. I love you so much. This was a terrible mistake, the biggest mistake I've ever made. Just, please, let me explain." Brian lifted his hand abruptly. His expression was stone cold, his eyes full of fire. "Shut up." His voice thundered through the room. The words hit like a hammer. Both women fell silent, their mouths frozen mid-plea, their faces stunned as if they'd just been slapped across the soul. "You don't get to explain anything," he growled. "You already told us everything we needed to know. Don't think I missed what you said just now. If you hadn't shown me, you've done this before. Many times, haven't you?" He jabbed the bat in Brenda's direction, and she shrank back like it was a spear. "You've been betraying me," he continued, his voice cracking with hurt beneath the fury. "And don't you dare try to paint it as love. What I saw wasn't love, it was selfish, filthy betrayal. You were in our bed. With another man. That's not a slip-up. That's a choice." "Brian, please," Brenda whispered, reaching out as if her tears could undo the damage. But Brian wasn't hearing it. "No," he snarled, his words sharp and bitter. "Just, don't. You've been lying to me. Sneaking around. Carrying on behind my back like I was some fool who'd never find out. And now you want to pretend this was some one-time thing? Some accident? Do you think? Oh, so I'm just that stupid, huh?" I said, my voice low but burning. "No, babe," Brian cut in before Brenda could answer. "Here's the deal." His tone shifted, calm, precise, and absolutely merciless. "As of this moment, you're free to sleep with anyone you want," he said. "Go ahead. Knock yourself out. Because you sure as hell won't be doing it as my wife anymore." Brenda gasped, her face turning ghostly white. Tears streamed down her cheeks, her mouth opening like she might plead again, but Brian's expression was carved in stone. He wasn't angry anymore, he was resolved. And that was far scarier. Without another word, he reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and tapped the screen. He held it up so Brenda could see the time. "You've got 10 minutes, he said flatly. 10 minutes to get whatever you want out of this house. After that, anything you leave behind is going straight into the trash. Right where you belong." He stepped closer to her, eyes narrowing into slits of pure fire. "The clock's ticking. Start moving." Brenda stood there for a beat, lips trembling like she was trying to form words but couldn't find the air. Brian didn't blink. His eyes held her there, completely still, until at last she broke. She slid off the bed slowly, clutching the sheet to cover herself, and stumbled toward the closet, still shaking. I turned to Linda. She hadn't moved. Still pressed against the headboard like her body was trying to disappear into the wall behind her. Her eyes were wide with dread, her arms wrapped around her chest like armor. "Linda," I said, my voice like steel, "my dear sweet wife. The same rules apply to you." She blinked. "Alex, you've got 10 minutes to get over to our house. When you get there, you'll have 10 minutes to pack your things and get out. All of them. I don't want to see you again. I don't want to hear your voice. Do you understand me?" "No. Please, Alex, don't do this," she cried, springing up from the bed. She reached out, grabbing at my arm like she could hold on to something that was already gone. "Please, I love you. I made a mistake, a huge mistake, but I can fix this. I swear I can fix it." I yanked my arm from her grasp, not gently, and stared straight into her eyes. "Fix this," I snapped. "You can't fix this, Linda." She flinched. "You didn't trip and fall into that man's arms. You chose him. You chose all of this. You knew what you were doing when you took off your clothes. When you brought him into our life, into our marriage bed." My voice cracked slightly, not from weakness but from the weight of what I was saying. "You made your decision. Now you live with it." I pointed firmly toward the door. "Get moving. Don't make me say it again." Her face crumpled and new tears spilled down her cheeks. But I didn't flinch. I didn't soften. I was done. Completely done. I turned to Brian, who stood with his arms folded across his chest, the bat now resting quietly at his feet. The fire in his eyes hadn't dimmed. "I'll talk to you later," I said quietly, my voice tight and raw. Brian gave me a short, firm nod. His face was tight, drawn with anger and pain, but composed. "Drive safe," he said quietly. Then, with a glance at his watch, he raised his voice over his shoulder. 9 minutes, Brenda." She didn't respond, just kept frantically shoving clothes into a half-zipped suitcase, her hands shaking, the sheet still wrapped around her. I didn't turn around. I didn't want to see Linda's face, not the tears, not the begging, not the look of someone suddenly terrified to lose what she'd taken for granted. I had no interest in her excuses. I left the room. My footsteps echoed down the hardwood hallway. I walked out the front door without hesitation and climbed into my car. As I shut the door behind me, the sound of it slamming shut felt like a wall going up between me and the life I used to know. My hands were trembling on the steering wheel. I closed my eyes and forced in a deep breath, trying to steady the chaos inside me. But it was no use. I felt like I was cracking from the inside out. I turned the key, started the engine, and pulled out of Brian's driveway, leaving the wreckage of my marriage behind me. The drive home was short, just a couple of miles, but even that felt like an eternity. Twice I had to pull over, each time doubling over and vomiting onto the side of the road. My body couldn't handle the betrayal. It was like my mind had been hit with a sledgehammer and my stomach was trying to purge the pain. When I finally made it to my house, I stepped inside slowly, every limb heavy with exhaustion and disbelief. I barely made it to the recliner in the den before collapsing into it. I sat there, my head in my hands, the crushing weight of what had just happened pressing down on my chest so hard I could barely breathe. About 5 minutes later, I heard the front door creak open. Linda walked in. Her steps were slow, hesitant, like she was afraid the floor might give out beneath her. Her voice followed, soft, cracked, and full of uncertainty. "Alex," she said, barely above a whisper. "Can we please talk about this? Please, is there any way we can work through it?" I looked up at her, stunned, not just by her presence but by the words she'd just spoken. My mouth hung open for a second as I tried to process it. Was she serious? "No," I said, the word hard and cold. "There's no way." She blinked, her face already wet with tears. "I never signed up to marry a 304, Linda," I said, each word deliberate. "And that's exactly what you are. Whether you get paid for it or not, it doesn't change what you've done." I looked at the clock. "You've got 9 minutes." She broke then. Completely. Her knees buckled slightly as she let out a sob so deep it came from somewhere raw inside her. Her face crumpled, her whole body trembling as she wept uncontrollably. I didn't move. I just sat there shaking my head in complete, dazed disbelief. Oh, I kept asking myself. How could she do this to me? How could she betray everything we built together? She wiped at her tears with the back of her hand, trying to steady herself. Her voice was fragile but desperate. Alex, you're the only one I love, she pleaded. You can't just throw it all away like this. That was it. I couldn't hold back any longer. No, Linda. You're the one who threw it away, I snapped, my voice rising, shaking with fury. You made that choice, not me. Her body flinched at the words. You're the idiot here, I shouted. Not me. She stood there, sobbing as I glanced at the clock again. 8 minutes, I said through clenched teeth. She turned and slowly walked down the hall, her cries echoing through the house. Every step she took was like she was being dragged, each one resisting the reality she was now forced to face. I stayed rooted in the living room, fists clenched so tightly my knuckles ached. My stomach churned, the nausea twisting deeper with every breath. I could feel the rage bubbling under the surface, barely contained, like a dam about to burst. I had to stay in control. I had to. After a moment of stillness, I forced myself to move. I summoned every shred of resolve I had left and walked slowly toward the bedroom. Linda was there, hunched over the bed, going through the motions of packing. She was tossing clothes into 2 open suitcases, but her movements were slow and unfocused. She wasn't folding anything. She wasn't even organizing. It was obvious she was stalling. Holding on to some hope, no matter how slim, that I'd falter. That I'd come in, say something, anything to give her another chance. But I was past that point. Without saying a word, I stepped up to the bags and zipped both of them shut. What are you doing? She cried out, her voice cracking with panic. The sudden sharpness of it cut through the air like glass. I told you 10 minutes, I said, my voice cold and unmoving. I gave you 15. You're done. She tried to protest, her hands grabbing at the half-zipped bag, but I ignored her. I lifted both suitcases, the weight nothing compared to what I felt inside, and carried them to the front door. Every step was deliberate. My heart was pounding, but I didn't let it shake me. At the door, I flung the suitcases onto the lawn. They hit the ground with a dull thud, one flipping open slightly, a blouse spilling onto the grass. No, she screamed, rushing up behind me. Alex, please? She tried to push past me, desperation radiating off her in waves. I caught her by the arm before she could get through. Let go of me, she shrieked, twisting in my grasp, her voice cracking under the weight of everything crashing down on her. You're not going to change my mind, I growled through gritted teeth. With one push, I guided her out the door. She stumbled, barefoot, onto the lawn. Her hair was a mess, her eyes red and puffy. She looked completely undone. But I didn't care. I turned back, snatched her purse from the table, pulled the keys out, and tossed it all outside after her. Take your stuff. And go, I said, my voice low, final. I'm done. She screamed raw and loud as I slammed the door. The sound echoed through the entire house like a shotgun blast. I leaned back against the wood for a second, chest heaving, the weight of it all pressing down on me. I felt like I was going to collapse, but I wasn't finished yet. I forced myself to move. I walked down the hallway into my home office and sat heavily at my desk. I turned on my PC and logged into our joint bank accounts. My fingers were shaking, but my mind was locked in. Account by account, I began severing ties, freezing cards, changing passwords, cutting off access. Every click was like sealing another wound. It wasn't just about money. It was about control. About reclaiming the parts of my life she no longer had the right to touch. When that was done, I looked over at the nightstand by the bed. A framed photo of us stared back. Me and Linda, grinning on a vacation we'd once thought would be the start of forever. I picked it up. Stared at it. For a second, I felt a knot in my throat. Then I smashed it against the edge of the dresser. The glass cracked and shattered. I tore the photo from the frame, ripped my face out of it, and flung the rest out the nearest window. I didn't care where it landed. Outside, I could still hear Linda's voice. Her pleading, sobbing, calling my name. Each word growing more broken than the last. But I didn't listen. She'd destroyed us long before today, long before I even realized it. I had been blind for so long. Looking back, I could see the signs were there, but I didn't want to believe them. I didn't want to imagine the woman I loved, the life we had, could all be built on a lie. But now the truth was undeniable. And it hurt like nothing else ever had. That Sunday afternoon, Brian and I sat down together, not as father and son-in-law, but as two men trying to navigate the ruins of their marriages. We weren't grieving anymore, we were planning. Strategizing for the week ahead. Both of us had made the same decision. We were filing for divorce, citing adultery as the grounds. Our attorney assured us that doing so could help minimize our liabilities in court. We took notes, exchanged details, and began to build our cases. Since that day, Linda and Brenda hadn't stopped trying to reach us. They flooded our phones with calls, home lines, office lines, even burner numbers. Texts, voicemails, emails, social media messages. It was relentless. But we ignored every single one. We knew exactly what those calls were: panic, guilt, desperation. Eventually, our attorney convinced us to agree to a meeting, a mediation session meant to discuss the terms of the divorce and hopefully avoid a drawn-out legal fight. Against our better judgment, we said yes. The conference room was suffocating, sterile, cold. I sat across from Linda, and though her face was soaked in tears, it didn't move me. There had been a time when her pain would have broken me, when I would have done anything to ease it. But now I didn't even flinch. Whatever connection we once had, it was long gone. Beside me, Brian sat stone-faced, arms crossed. Across from him, Brenda looked at him like a woman begging for a lifeline she'd already burned. "Brian," she said gently, "I know you're hurt. You have every right to be. But don't turn your back on your daughter." Brian's jaw clenched tight. He looked at her with an expression I'd never seen before, cold and empty. "My daughter?" he said, his voice like ice. "You raised her to lie, to deceive, to betray. You made her into a mirror of yourself." Brenda paled, her mouth falling open slightly. "You taught her exactly how to be like you. And after what I've seen, I have no reason to believe she's even mine." Brenda recoiled, her whole body stiffening. "Brian, surely you don't mean that," she whispered. His voice stayed even, no rage, no yelling. Just devastating calm. "The only way I'll believe she's mine is with a DNA test. And even if she is," he said slowly, "it doesn't change what you turned her into." His words hung in the air like a blade. From that point on, Brian decided to move forward, not with anger but with peace. He adopted a female German shepherd from a local shelter. A few weeks later, she gave birth to a litter of 5 pups. They became his new family. He poured his heart into caring for them, raising them. The daily routine, the unconditional love, they gave him a sense of purpose again. A quiet solace that helped fill the silence left behind. As for me, I didn't let the betrayal define me. I couldn't. One evening, not long after the dust had settled, I found myself in a cozy corner of a local cafe. It was just supposed to be a stop for coffee, but that's where I met Sarah. She had this calm presence, an easy smile, and eyes that felt like home. She was smart, confident, and had a quiet strength that immediately drew me in. We struck up a conversation, and what started as small talk turned into hours. Our connection felt natural, unforced, like it had been waiting to happen. Soon we were spending weekends together, hiking trails, sharing stories, rediscovering laughter. She didn't try to replace what I'd lost. Instead, she reminded me that not everything in life ends in betrayal. That love, when it's real, doesn't break you, it helps you heal.